Well, we're going to come on to our final session, and somehow we're only about 5 or 6 minutes overdue. Who knew? It is a panel session of some of our speakers from earlier about the key themes. If we can bring forward, once I introduce them, so that's Anne Hyatt, Alex Lloyd of Burgess Salmon, Ben Harris of Bevan Britain, Dale Vince, Ecotricity, Green Entrepreneur, Duncan McIntyre of Lombard Odier, and Richard Godfrey from Rocket Makers. If you can all magically appear, we'd rather like that. Otherwise, I just have to keep infilling until you do, which would be fatal. We do want to pick up some of the key themes that you've experienced, but also some other points. I'm going to begin with a slightly contrarian point, which is similar to something that Richard, you said earlier, which is you have to imagine something that isn't there. So we've covered a lot of ground today, but what have we not covered in terms of entrepreneurial thinking and values? Who would like to go first on that? Please, someone.
I haven't been here for the whole session, but I'll give it a go.
Go on then. Thanks, Dale.
I'm going to guess that you may not have considered an alternative motive to making money. Using business to bring about an environment gain or a societal gain, that kind of stuff, a repurposing of business, which I think is really important. I think that business is a great model. It offers great efficiency and focus. But I think for the last untold number of decades, it's been focused on the wrong thing, making money. And when you prioritize making money, you make bad decisions in every other respect. So I don't know if you guys covered that off. Motivation, I would say.
We've touched on that. I'd actually like to bring in Duncan on this point. So, Dale, you may not have seen this piece, but Lombard Odier had a big piece of research, some great research about entrepreneurial thinking and values. And one of the points that they unearthed was a current dichotomy between entrepreneurs saying that sustainability matters, but they're not putting their value, their portfolio in anything like the proportion. Stuart, can you just pick up that point about, which you did talk about in your discussion, about the importance of sustainability as a business model?
Yeah, look, I absolutely. I mean, I think we would contend that the sustainability revolution, whatever term you want to use, is the investment opportunity biggest investment opportunity we'll ever see in our lifetimes. I think we're embarking on a very extraordinary journey as we see businesses transition to, and I think it's very easy to assume that you should just be looking at a full sustainable solution, but actually there's huge transition happening in businesses, and we saw from the survey that we did that over 50% of the entrepreneurs that we surveyed have completely changed their business model in the last 18 months. But yet we're starting to see a bit of a dichotomy happening when they sell their businesses, how they're investing their money. 75% of them are saying, we believe in the need to deal with global warming, but yet only 25% of them are actually investing sustainably. And underneath it is a really interesting statistic, one that I think we would contend very strongly, which is 33% of them think that investing sustainably means they're going to make less money. Now, I think that is very old thinking, and I think our job as fiduciaries is to challenge and educate investors on the importance of that model, because I think there is a huge investment opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier on, Greg, we've just endowed the first professorship at Oxford University in sustainability, and we've become B Corp, which I think is something that Dale would understand, and I would put it out to many of the entrepreneurs in this call as well, to think about B Corp status as being a thing that not only represents the value you have as a business, the values you have as a business, but the way that you also want to do business with others, because I think it is a very important transition.
It really does sound as though a number of pieces are coming together here: the sustainability point, the entrepreneurs, the funding of capital, which ultimately is a key driver of business, and that opportunity. So, to the extent we can help broker those relationships, please do take advantage of this, the connections that are made. And I think I mentioned in passing previously, we will be running a sustainability conference subsequently. I'd like to ask you this as questions to each, and I'll perhaps direct this one specifically at Anne, and others join. We've heard much about the maverick nature of entrepreneurs, the single individuals as drivers. What about a more collaborative approach? Maybe specifically, how useful are co-preneurs?
I saw best case practice at Google with our co-preneurs, our co-founders there with Larry and Sergey. And I think a really special element of their success was them being really honest with themselves about where their strengths lie and where they did not. In bringing on Eric Schmidt as what they called parental, like adult supervision, was them hiring for talents that they didn't have and weren't going to be able to develop at scale as fast as they needed them. And I really watched kind of a best case model there with the way that they respected each other, actively debated, and pushed each other to question their thinking, anticipate blind spots, and to not fall too in love with their first idea. And I think that was a really essential element for Google becoming the company that it is today.
And if I could bring in Alex on that same point, the entrepreneurs you're advising, are you seeing and obviously it does come to term sheets and about equity splits and so on, are you seeing a slightly more collaborative approach, a slightly more broader base when it comes to equity distribution through teams and through seniors?
Yeah, well, when I see founders coming to me, they're usually doing something. They're usually raising some money, and the investors they may be looking at a single individual who's the linchpin, but they're looking more broadly. They're usually backing a management team as a collective, and so there's a lot of thought goes into the balance of the equity split and who's being incentivized where. And I mean, obviously there are outliers and there are individuals that attract investment on their own merits, but most of the time we're looking at the management team altogether. So to me, and in all the deals that I do, it's that collective that's important, and it's that whole team that's being backed rather than the individual usually.
Richard, your world, both specifically within Rocket Makers, but the companies you partner with, I guess that point of collaboration, whether it's equity-based or simply about running, creating, building, etc., is increasingly important, one would imagine?
Yeah, I think so, Greg, and I think, and I mentioned a little bit in my talk that I think our mentality is all this has always been about working, whether you're in a founding team in a startup or whether you're supporting that founding team, to try and make sure that the kind of win-win or lose-lose scenarios there. So our thinking is that we kind of want to have that open, trusted relationship with people where if it's successful, we all succeed. If it fails, we all learn the mistakes together and go forward with that. So it's that's for me, that's the true collaboration piece. Is when if one of the parties stands to gain when the other loses, that's where it all falls down.
Thanks. And Ben, from your experience with Bevan Britton, what experience have you had of exactly that equity point, that collaboration amongst entrepreneurs with their partner in crime alongside and so on, as distinct from the maverick leadership entrepreneur approach?
Yeah, it's something we see with kind of startups and founders a lot of the time. They're really looking for for diversity of thought in their business, for different points of view, and it's something you see more and more of. People really considering the advisors that they have around them and partnering with them, and being really conscious that they as an individual don't have all the answers. And really being aware that they need to seek that from elsewhere and building a good team around themselves.
So I'm going to ask a question. So as we're getting towards the end of our day, and we've had these wonderful entrepreneurs listening to you, I suppose what I'd like to know is if there were two things that each one of them could take away from today's advice, the things that you have told us, could you just go through them again? So what two things would you say to the entrepreneurs that they could take away and keep and might help them in their journey to becoming the most successful entrepreneurs in whatever way, whatever sector they're in? So should we start with, let's start with Richard.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the two that I wanted to really highlight are, I suppose I try to bring it out as the question why, and it's the fundamental passion that people have behind it. I think Dale got it really across in the keynote there. You could really see that what that underlying sort of fundamental belief and goals are, and the reason for the purpose of the company. And so I think really understanding that and keep asking why until you draw back into the real definition of what really matters to you personally, but also as an organization. And then the second thing that I also try to bring out is a little bit about enjoying the journey. This is a risky model. It's when people go into startups as entrepreneurs, there's often big lights that people expect to see, and actually it's a long, hard grind in a lot of respects. And you know, one of the things that perhaps we didn't really pick up on in the conference, Greg, was mental health and the impact of that with entrepreneurs, and you know, the impact around families and things that dedication to actually achieve something can really do. So I think, you know, for me, it's about the second part is about enjoying the journey. You know, recognizing that it is a journey, that you may never get to the end of it, but actually, you know, if you're not enjoying every step of the way, then you're missing some of that.
If you're not enjoying it, why do it almost? Maybe people don't have quite that choice. Others would like to take Kalpna's point. Two key things that you've either given or heard from this conference today.
If I may, I think the point that I think Richard just picked up on there is the emotional side. And I think one thing that came out very strongly from our survey work is actually one of the biggest issues that entrepreneurs face is the emotional impact of being an entrepreneur. And I think it's probably deeper than we realize. In a boring financial context, entrepreneurs are taking risks beyond anything that we can imagine. They are putting everything on the black. They are following their conviction, their passions, and they are creating consequence and waves. And I think that does lead to emotional outcomes, both during the journey and potentially when you sell. And I think the second bit of advice would be that from the entrepreneurs themselves, they're saying, you know, take time, really think things through, because I think that, you know, from a deep passion can come an instinctive need to do something, but there's also a need then to start thinking in a much more linear way as you plan your way through your journey. So I think that the two sides of the coin are definitely connected, but that emotional point, I think, is a very important one in terms of how much you have to believe. And one entrepreneur, and I'll quote it, said, "When I sold my business, it was like selling my child." So there is a huge emotional engagement around the effort that goes into creating something special.
So actually, let me come to Dale on that point. I mean, you've quite clearly made it clear that you're not a traditional business person. You don't think of yourself as a business person. You did sell a business recently. I'm not for a moment suggesting it was like selling a child, literally as in any way at all. But what was that like for you? That recognition point that I think in the releases around it, you talked in terms of there is a better home for that asset. What was it like actually letting go?
You know, it was no big deal actually, and it was more akin to having a child leave home. You know, it was time. It was time for that child to leave home, if you want to continue the analogy. And in our case, you know, the electric highway, we've been running it for 10 years. We started when there were no cars on the road. We'd put, I don't know, £8 million into it. We built a national network. The car revolution has really taken off in the meantime. The next 10 years, we'll see a completion of that when you will no longer be able to buy a petrol or diesel car by 2030. And so the work to be done in the next 10 years is massive. And it's a simple piece of logic from our point of view that there are other people better suited to doing that than us. And we've done our best work, and it's time to move on and find another frontier.
Oh, that's clear. And back to Kalpna's question about two key points. Perhaps we might bring in Anne on this. I mean, you covered an extraordinary amount of activity, both personal but corporate as well, in your talk earlier. But if you were to boil down either things that you've said already, but perhaps you've heard elsewhere during the conference, two pieces of advice or observations.
Well, several of the things I had on my initial list have been said, so I'll dig deeper from beyond my first two. And I would really say up-leveling the talent of your team that you have around you. I touched on that with the Roger Bannister analogy in my keynote. But I see this with all of my clients at the moment when they're really at a moment of refocusing in on their mission, thinking about the purpose and what they're putting out into the world. They're having a moment of realization that they need to up-level their team, people who can run at the pace they need to, who have the experience, the observations, and are so mission aligned that they can give them the honesty they need to make the hard decisions. So if I had to pick just one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, it would be that. Surround yourself with people who can pace you and who are the right company for this relentless pace that we're all on at the moment.
That was an extremely good metaphor. The two runners pacing Roger Bannister at that time, who are less known. I think one went on to be a Conservative minister, Christopher Chataway. Another one, I think, founded the London Marathon. But at any rate, they're not as known as that one person that they were effectively piloting in on that magic mile, as you talked about, and for perhaps all of us to realise the benefit of essentially of teamwork, the different roles that different people play. I'd like to come to a stand-back point for any of you to offer. I mean, maybe Ben to come in first on this one. That conventionally and until fairly recently, first mover advantage was a thing. It really was a thing. Has that eroded over time as business essentially has got more plural and different routes to market and so on? What do we think about that first mover advantage point? Ben?
Yeah, that's a slightly tricky one. I'd say, getting to something first. I think that there is always going to be a bit of an advantage there. But then there will always kind of be people who come behind you, see what you're doing, or kind of are able to work with you to develop and perhaps overthink you. So I think that's what I'd say on that.
Well, I'll bring in Dale on this because you know, in conventional business terms, you have had first mover advantage. Do you see it as a thing? Do you think that's a part of your success, that you spotted that opportunity? Well, not even spotted, it was so ingrained in your soul, but you were aware of it and went for it. Did that benefit you by going early?
I don't think so. I think first mover advantage is overestimated, and I think quite often second and third movers can come along, they can learn from what you're doing, and they can do it better, actually, and often they can do it bigger as well because they're better funded, particularly in our case, you know, because we're a kind of bootstrapped entity. We make the money that we spend, and then we spend it and do the next thing. So I think first mover advantage can be overestimated. I have a great experience of that in the electric highway. I mean, we were absolute first movers, but 10 years later, our equipment was very old. And the second, third movers that came in a couple of years ago, they had modern stuff. And it was kind of, it was shaming our customer experience. And you know, one of the things we've had to do in the last few months is begin a replacement program for the entire fleet. Because when we built ours, for example, there was no such thing as contactless payments. And so you had to have an app for access. So we've had to bring that tech in. And in that case, first mover advantage was a burden to us until we could find the funds to replace everything.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of, you're touching on one point there, which is the sort of legacy technology point. If you come in almost too early to a different stage, I think it's that stat that it was a much faster rollout of mobile phones in Africa because there wasn't quite the same legacy technology infrastructure or telephony infrastructure that there was elsewhere in the world. And sometimes the happenstance of timing, which several of you have talked about today, actually is a really key benefit, not even aware of it necessarily at the time. Have you got some more questions for our august panel?
I have got one question, and that is, at the beginning of the day, we heard Chris Anderson, and I still have his words in my head. As with all of you, you've spoken so fantastically well today. He talked about reimagining the future. And that really got me thinking. And as entrepreneurs, you're trying to think not just in the way that everybody thinks, but taking that time to think about how things could look different. So could I ask each one of you to come up with one word that you could say would look like, how if you were reimagining the future, what would that one word be?
And all of you are thinking, I don't want to be the sixth one on this, so who's going to go first?
Yeah, particularly where we are now, I think that word can be really helpful today.
I'll go.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Ecotopia.
Thank you. Really good word. I think we should write these up and pass them around.
I think Ecotopia is also in your book as well. It's a wonderful neologism. So, you know, another link, another plug for your book. So
and it's a good word for us to learn. I think that's the other thing. The more we say the things, the more we understand what it means as well. And I think that, you know, whatever word it is important. So what about you?
Sorry, it's got embedded idealism as well, which has been such a characteristic of a number of the entrepreneurs we've been speaking to today. Sorry, you can say.
No, that's great.
I've got one, but I'm absolutely not going to coin it. It does not belong to me. It belongs to Harvard Business School. So what they did was combine competition and cooperation into co-optation, which I think is a concept that you will see a lot more of in the evolving world. So co-optation was my word.
I wonder if Word would auto-correct that to one or the other of those two words. It sounds like a tough gig to get that in the public consciousness.
Co-optation.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn that. Co-optation.
It's as bad as we were talking earlier about futurologizing.
I couldn't say futurologizing.
If that's a thing. Talking of futurologizing, what about Richard on this? Perhaps one word. It doesn't have to be a neologism. It can be something which sums up the spirit of the age.
Well, I think it's about diversity. This one. So I think it really is that getting lots of different perspectives and different backgrounds and minds onto things is the opportunity ahead for this.
Well, who knew? Our two lawyers, whose the whole world of being a lawyer is at least in part embedded in words. You are the two last. What are your two words to sum up the opportunities are? And then we'll come to Anne as our last.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Richard has just stolen my word, which was going to be about diversity. I was going to talk about having a wide range of viewpoints, and I was going to use the word diversity for it. So I'm at a loss, Greg. So I'm going to have to nick Richard's word and just go with that.
Who has ever known a lawyer to be at a loss for words? But today it's a first, ladies and gentlemen. Our other lawyer from Devon, Britain, perhaps isn't lost for words. No pressure.
I've been really encouraged. One of the things that's kind of been talked about a bit today is well-being, and just thinking about entrepreneurs and like the emotional toll that has. It just wasn't. It's only recently become part of the conversation. So struggling to find a pithier way of saying it, but well-being focused would be my hyphenated one word.
That's a compound hyphenation. That's like a German compound noun or something. Anne, how about you?
If I had to choose a silver thread among all those beautiful words chosen before me, I think it's about being purposeful in the journey that we're on, the contributions we're making to this world and our communities, and the people with whom we spend this journey. I hope that on the other side of COVID, when we realize how precious life is and how we only get one of these, that we are very purposeful in what we are contributing and how we're going to be remembered, and think about how the decisions we're making every day is our legacy, our living legacy.
Well, I think thank you ever so much. I think we've got two last questions, one from Carlton and then one from me.
So another question, and this is all about my learning, so you can tell this. And I'm hoping the entrepreneurs who are listening will really, really benefit from this too. So I've been really inspired by listening to you all today. And what I'd really like to know is, where do you go to get your inspiration, each one of you?
Maybe start with Dale.
Dale. I was just going to say Dale, yeah.
Would you mind?
I don't actually. I just have it within me. I think a lot, and I'm motivated by the things that bother me, the things that I think need doing, need putting right, and I see no obstacles. So I kind of don't need motivation or encouraging, because I don't think there's anything that I can't tackle if I want to, and so I've got no inspirational stories or figures or places that I can name.
Well, that's very clear. How about our others? Where do you get your inspiration? Not so much your information, because there's multiple, but inspiration.
Well, I can have a go, which is, one of the great things about Rocket Makers is that we spend an awful lot of time just having the opportunity to talk to entrepreneurs about their ideas and stuff. So just seeing so many people so passionate about what they're trying to do and stuff is every day is just it's a fascinating part of that. So and that gives me a huge buzz when I'm doing that. And I guess the other thing that I'd add, and it's certainly in this COVID world, is one of the things I love to do whenever we can is to get over to the west coast of the United States, because just a week with entrepreneurs in that sort of environment is just like an injection of passion and interest around it. So I don't quite know how to tap that. If I could, I would bring loads of it back with me and do it. But that's probably my thoughts.
If you could bottle the Kool-Aid, you bring it back, but just keep drinking the Kool-Aid, I guess, meantime. Any other inspirational sources for any others? Otherwise, we'll come to a last point. No, yes, no? You talk about the west coast of America. I'm going to talk about the west coast of the UK here and bring in Anne, so prior warning, alert. On this question first, and others please join subsequently. You're the furthest away, essentially, from this area. Why do you think the Southwest is so strong on entrepreneurialism? And then perhaps a related one, and what can we help to do to foster that going forwards?
Well, coming from the West Coast of the United States, I did feel very much at home in the environment there. And I think this is a question I was asked a lot in the last years I was working at Google when we were working with policymakers around the world. And the most frequently asked question was, how do we replicate Silicon Valley here? What is the secret sauce, the formula that I need as a lawmaker to enable this kind of ecosystem of creativity and innovation? And our answers were really usually centered around education. The stellar university system that you have, especially at the PhD level, will become more and more important as we advance into more developed technologies like artificial intelligence. Second is a culture of innovation and tolerance, and I find that to be thriving in that part of the UK for sure. There's just this energy and this support and kind of this dialogue, even at the pace of on the street. It's kind of palpable when you're there. And then really having these, what you really look for is these natural incubators. Is there a place where innovative thinkers gather? And I think that is what Richard's talking about what you feel when you go to California, is that incubator spirit where people are, instead of competing with each other, very much collaborating and assisting. It's a small world in tech. And so you realize quickly that it's a small family. And so we're all there to kind of help each other and pull each other along. So for me, those are the three elements that really stood out to me when I transplanted from California to Europe.
Yeah, and you've got experience directly with the Southwest. You're talking to a number of the companies here. As mentioned earlier, you're an advisor to Armadillo, so you can see this distinctive entrepreneurialism of the Southwest. What about our other panelists? Dale, we've touched on this point, but perhaps less for you specifically, but more generally, is there something about the Southwest which does help foster entrepreneurialism?
Honestly, I don't know, because I've not been doing this anywhere else. But alongside our wooden football stadium that we plan to build at Junction 13 of the M5, we are planning a 4,000 job green tech business park. And we would like to create some of that, some of that vibe that was being discussed, by the speakers just now, the kind of startup mentality, the collaboration, but in the green tech space. So kind of green Silicon Valley we hope to create in the Southwest.
An actual valley almost. It's sort of the metaphor becomes more real, but who knows? So that's good to hear. How about our other panelists? What is it that's special about the Southwest? The people watching today, they're part of this ecosystem.
Let's be honest, it's the most beautiful part of the UK, and even though I have a clear Scottish name, I was brought up in a little town called Pilton, and I'm an adorer of the West Country. And from a very early age, I saw entrepreneurialism in its truest form in something called Worthy Farm, where I was helping Michael in the very early days of that, and it's turned into the most extraordinary success story in the world when it comes to the performing arts. So, I think the West Country's got a lot going for it. And if you want your special place, you go even further west, and it gets even more beautiful. And I hope that Cornwall will have had an extra injection by the G7 having recently taken place there, and other people seeing the beauty of it. And in lockdown, I guarantee you'll find it hard to get a restaurant.
And as Dale mentioned earlier, I think you said you saw your first wind farm in, I think, Delabole in Cornwall. The whole of the Southwest, the further down the peninsula as well, plays its part. And Glastonbury absolutely is part of Brand Southwest. It's one of the reasons why it is cool, why it does attract such great entrepreneurs. Unless there are further thoughts, I think we're going to call this a day. And we're going to thank, on your behalf, our expert panelists, Anne Hyatt, Dale Vince, Alex Lloyd, Burgess Salmon, Richard Godfrey, Rocket Makers, Ben Harris of Bevan Britain, and Duncan McIntyre from Lombard Odier. To our panelists, thank you very much indeed.